You're probably wondering how I got here, sitting in this too quiet house while the kids were living somewhere else with him. Really? It wasn't a sudden explosion. It was more akin to a gradual leak that eventually corroded everything until the entire structure collapsed. In retrospect, it really does look like one of those slow-motion auto accidents that are featured in safety videos. You can't quite believe it's happening to you, but you can see it approaching frame after agonizing. Frame. To put it gently, things became complicated. My name is Amy, I'm 38, and yes, things got complicated. In the unrelenting grind of daily existence, it all began, or perhaps it didn't begin there, but just became unavoidable. On the surface, the life Perry and I created seemed to be going well, didn't it? Similar to what you may find in a catalog for reasonably priced furniture. A nice, although dull suburban area with a decent enough house. 2 children, Chloe, 11, sharp as a tack, doing fine in school, and largely staying out of trouble. Liam, 13, is already taller than me. I had my work, which, to be honest, required more mental capacity and generated more revenue, and Perry had his reliable, respectable job in whatever middle management activity he performed. He never really accepted that, though. We performed the entire household dance, tumultuous mornings driven by lukewarm coffee and desperate looks for misplaced shoes, balancing work deadlines with passive-aggressive emails, preparing hurried dinners that someone, usually Liam, always complained about, and then falling asleep on the couch while browsing through our phones because we were too exhausted to talk much. God, Brenda's gained weight, I thought to myself as I stood on the sidelines of Liam's soccer matches, engaged in polite small talk with the other mothers, and made endless grocery runs under fluorescent lights. If we could somehow synchronize 4 different schedules, we might be able to see friends. You mean a typical middle-class hamster wheel? However, beneath that gleaming exterior, a more complex and chaotic reality was developing. It's odd, isn't it, that after 15 years of sharing a bed, a toilet, a mortgage, 2 children, and innumerable takeout containers, you still feel as though you're on entirely separate planets and speak fundamentally different languages. Perhaps 3 or 4 years ago, Perry went through a phase in which he became excessively focused on improving himself. All of a sudden, his podcast feed was filled with therapists interviewing other therapists, and the nightstand was laden with books by Brené Brown and a person who discussed habits. He started going to therapy on a regular basis, which is excellent for you, Perry, and good for you. He then began attempting to apply his newly acquired wisdom to us, trying to bring it all home. All of a sudden, we had to have a structured conversation with active listening, which mainly involved him looking at me closely while I spoke, waiting to interrupt with his eye. Before we talked about anything even somewhat challenging, we needed to assess our emotional capacity. As a matter of fact, there were moments when I simply wanted him to empty the ridiculously full recycle bin without engaging in a lengthy Socratic discussion about the fundamental dynamics of home chore distribution and apparent fairness. It was draining. I never seemed to remember the times he truly helped out around the house, like when he loaded the dishwasher or mowed the grass, but he would bring up minor things that seemed to fester in his sensitive nature. He used that cautious, therapist-taught tone to say, "It feels like you have selective memory when it comes to my contributions, Amy," which made me tense. I mean, please, as if my mind wasn't already racing with details like birthday party RSVPs, doctor's appointments, orthodontic consultations, school permission forms, and who gets to feed the dog that never stops shedding. I only have space for the most important things in my brain, which is like a crammed attic. Naturally, I recall the significant events and the big blunders, such as the day when he totally forgot our anniversary dinner reservation at the upscale restaurant I had been hinting at for months, and we ended up at Chili's instead. I can still clearly recall that. That's prioritizing important information, not selective memory. Naturally, he made an effort to discuss feelings, particularly his own. It frequently sounded like whining wrapped in sophisticated psychiatric terms. Amy, when you dismiss my concerns about the budget like that, I feel invalidated and unheard. Oh, who are you? In this connection, someone has to be the fulcrum of reality, right? While he's out listening to some podcast guru urge him to purchase cryptocurrency or whatever the flavor of the month was, someone needs to keep things grounded. Being the responsible adult in charge of the actual home money because someone had to was not demeaning. Rather, it was being pragmatic. Try telling him that, though. I'd just have to roll my eyes inwards and force a tight smile on my face when he got that look, the slightly injured puppy dog expression with a dash of condescending patience. I would try to bring us back to the shores of everyday, unanalyzed existence by saying, "Oh, don't be so dramatic, Perry," in a light, airy voice. To lighten the mood, I would occasionally quip that his ambitious ambitions to launch his own consulting business seemed to be perpetually stalled in the research and brainstorming stage. However, he would become quite silent, and his shoulders would droop slightly. In all honesty, he is far too sensitive for his own benefit. Avoiding making another sincere, "I feel" comment, or suggesting that we analyze my response was like negotiating a minefield. For the most part, we were all right. It was simply life. With all of this, he was the one making things more difficult and burdensome than necessary. Continuous self-reflection. After then, things undoubtedly became more rocky. Papering over the Yahweh. Small fissures in the foundation proved more difficult. At least not yet. It wasn't one big spectacular occurrence. It was more akin to a string of minor earthquakes that continued to disturb things. For example, when Perry wanted to discuss our finances in detail. He had somehow learned that I had received a respectable bonus at work. It was my money, gained, via my hard hours and negotiating workplace politics, so maybe I hadn't exactly shouted it from the rooftops. It was private property. He began discussing long-term estimates, ambitious savings objectives, and account consolidation. The laptop had his spreadsheet open. My hands were starting to perspire, and I could feel my chest constricting. It was more like an interrogation than a conversation. I felt as though my own husband was auditing me. Therefore, it's possible that I shed a few tears, used the overwhelmed card, and told him that he was placing too much pressure on me. After a hard, demanding week at my actual job, discussing money in such clinical depth just made me feel worried. It functioned as it usually did. He instantly retreated, apologizing for upsetting me, and seemed remorseful and solicitous. Sometimes, you just need to carefully place the waterworks, don't you think? Get them to stop bothering you and diffuse the situation. It's only about controlling our feelings, both his and mine. Then there was the agonizing Henderson's dinner party. Sarah Henderson, my God. Her flawlessly manicured Instagram account, her obnoxiously well-behaved kids, her husband who treats her as though she personally hung the moon, and her immaculately clean home with its beige furnishings all give her an image of easy perfection. With her healthy snacks and her conversation about their vacation to Tuscany, she feels like she's so much superior to everyone else. On the inside, that arrogant, sanctimonious person most likely took Xanax like Tic Tacs. Anyway, I was acting like the devoted, endearing wife that evening, laughing heartily at Perry's somewhat cheesy jokes, giving him a tender pat on the arm when Sarah brought up their anniversary, and gushing about how great he is at accommodating the kids' ever more erratic schedules. If I may say so myself, this performance is truly Oscar-worthy. I can't even recall what tiny thing he did earlier that day, but it was something small, like forgetting to pick up the dry cleaning I specifically asked him to acquire or putting his wet towel on the bed once more. Later, though, I gave it to him while I was cooped up in the car, traveling home in the dark. I just criticized everything he did and said at the party, including the way he cut me off when I was telling him about my work presentation, the way he failed to support me while Sarah was quietly boasting about her most recent promotion, and the way he appeared disinterested when I was speaking to Jim Henderson. He simply sat there, staring straight ahead at the road while holding onto the steering wheel with white knuckles. Leaping in. His jaw appears flawless in public, but in private, he is informed of the true score. You have to keep things looking nice, but you also have to make sure they don't become too cozy, don't you? Make sure they're alert. But he persisted. Persistent little woodpecker, I'll give him that. Little things, such as his recent rule that phones are not allowed at the dinner table, are primarily taken from his self-help books or therapy sessions. He came across it in an essay that was meant to promote mindfulness and connection, or something like that. My supervisor sent me an email notification the first night my phone buzzed on the table. My first instinct was to grab it. He gives me the therapist in training look, the patient, somewhat dissatisfied glance. Amy, we talked about this. It's important family time. Let's try to be present. What if it was vital, really? What if there really was an emergency? What if more likely my supervisor needed something? The mortgage is currently paid for by my job, friend. Calm down, Perry. Maybe a little sharper than I meant to. I snapped back and grabbed my phone. It's just a quick check. Don't make everything a federal case. Not everything requires a family mandate. He let out that tired, long-suffering sigh. He had mastered and mumbled something quietly about respect for one another and boundaries. To be honest, the man was not even skilled at using them to battle. He gathered treatment buzzwords like Pokemon cards. He would suddenly bring up old topics, generally when he felt cornered in another dispute, such as our argument last year about spending Thanksgiving with his parents. When I proposed that we remain for 2 nights rather than 4, he would reinterpret it and make it seem as though I was purposefully attempting to damage his connections with his family. Memory that is selective. I conveniently forgot my sister's birthday that same month, so look in the mirror, friend. You're reading too much into it, became my go-to defense and deflection. For good measure, I would occasionally add another small jab, perhaps about how his mother still treated him like a 10-year-old whenever we went to visit, making fun of his attire or his parenting, just enough to make him wince and remind him that he wasn't exactly Mr. Independent himself. Regardless, I suppose he was attempting to improve things in accordance with his definition. However, he was attempting the wrong fixes. His sensitivity, his unwillingness to leave things alone, and his desire to dissect everything were the true problems that he was unable to recognize. He was attempting to correct me. Then the true pressure began, the kind that turns spiderwebs of tiny fissures into large fractures. The large, dependable company Perry had worked for more than 10 years announced a significant reorganization. Departments were being combined or shut down, and layoffs were imminent. Mr. Coleman, calmed by mindfulness, was suddenly anything but. He was a complete mess, pacing the kitchen like a caged animal, moaning about severance payouts, and continuously checking his work email on his phone. Job markets and ages. And I simply felt incredibly furious and annoyed rather than experiencing a wave of sympathy or even modest worry. Morning, noon, and night, he talked about it all. No matter how the chat began, it always returned to the office rumors, the uncertainty, and the never-ending what-ifs. Instead of crumbling on me and bringing his job turmoil into my haven, I needed him to be strong, the provider, and able to manage things discreetly. After he went into yet another lengthy speech on some VP's mysterious email and what it might imply for his division, I finally replied, "Okay, Perry, we get it. It's stressful." One evening, I was no longer patient. But constantly talking about it, obsessing over it, isn't helping, is it? You're just making everyone else in this house anxious with your negativity. He appeared truly stunned, as if I had just given him a slap. He claimed that he needed to digest it, that talking about it helped him deal with it, and that keeping it to himself wasn't good for him. Internally, Dr. Phil is giving unsolicited advice from the armchair once more, but there was a frenetic buzzing beneath my skin, a craving to know what was really going on. Before he even removed his coat, I would start asking him questions as soon as he entered the room. Did you hear anything concrete today? Who did you talk to? What did they say specifically? Are you safe? However, if he made an effort to genuinely discuss his emotions, his worries about maybe losing his job, or his sentiments of failure, forget it. My eyes would go glazed. I would abruptly shift the topic and interrupt him. Did you remember to call the plumber about the leaky? I became enraged when he began to retreat once more, became quiet, and internalized the tension. How could he have ignored my request for information? It seemed like a purposeful omission. When he came home late from a long run one evening, I confronted him. So you'll talk to your therapist about it for an hour, dissect every nuance, but you won't talk to your own wife? This was his new healthy coping mechanism, which conveniently got him out of the house during the hectic dinner, homework, and bedtime rush. He simply appeared worn out and defeated. He acknowledged that I had a lot on my plate and claimed he didn't want to add to my load. Put a strain on me? His possible issue was endangering our financial security, which caused me stress. The invalidation became more brutal and incisive. I began to bring up his prior failures more frequently, particularly those related to money, as if they were subtle reminders of his frailty. It's probably not even going to happen, Perry. You always catastrophize, assuming the worst. Just deal with it like an adult. A few years ago, his surefire tech stock bet went bankrupt. One night, with a lot of implied meaning, I said, "Are you sure you can even handle this kind of pressure?" I kept reminding him of the times I thought he wasn't helping me enough while I was under stress. There were times when he picked up the slack without complaining, when he attended parent-teacher conferences alone, and when he conveniently forgot all the meals he prepared. Even the children sensed it. Liam undoubtedly became quieter and drew back into his headphones. Chloe became more needy and experienced unexplained stomach aches before bed. Unspoken bitterness and fear weighed heavily on the house's air. Doing this was the one thought that kept racing through my mind. His drama, his weakness, is ruining everything. The last dispute, which blew up the whole affair, began over something so ridiculously trivial and uninteresting that it's almost comical now. Pizza toppings, really. The one tradition we still grudgingly followed was Friday night, which was designated as our pizza and movie night. I was feeling daring and wanted that fancy pepperoni with prosciutto and arugula, but Perry wanted his typical boring pepperoni. The children's voices were irritating my already strained nerves as they argued noisily in the background over who had the last piece of garlic bread from the previous evening. The underlying tension exacerbated the usual family dysfunction, but Perry was still tense from the week, and the cloud of the layoff hung over him. He snapped, not yelling, not throwing things, but his voice went dangerously low, tight with a control that was almost scarier than shouting. I said something dismissive, and he sighed theatrically, saying, "God, can you just decide already? Perry, it's pizza, not nuclear physics. Some of us are hungry. Amy, can we just have one meal, one single meal without the digs, without the sarcasm, without the constant critique? I'm dealing with a lot right now, okay? All right, let's start with the little violins for St. Perry the Martyr, who had a lot to deal with." He actually tried it then, the therapy speak, right there in the middle of the kitchen, with a faint smell of burnt garlic bread. We're all dealing with a lot. Everything revolves around your moods, your stress, and your endless navel-gazing. It's all about you, isn't it? I shot back, my own voice instantly rising, sharp and brittle. He inhaled deeply and purposefully, then met my gaze with a sincere expression. "Amy, when you dismiss my stress like that, when you make it seem like an inconvenience to you, it makes me feel completely alone in this marriage." Feeling attacked? Of course. He was putting the blame for his emotions on me, accusing me of causing his tension. I went utterly crazy at that point. All of the bottled-up anger, years of irritation, and the sense of being bound to Mr. Sensitive suddenly boiled over and burst forth. Alone? You want to talk about feeling alone, Perry? How about all the times I've had to handle everything? The bills, the kids' issues, the house repairs, because you were too busy finding yourself or chasing some ridiculous pipe dream business idea that never went anywhere? I began making a list of everything, including little and major complaints, rehashing old disputes, and bringing up every perceived slight from the previous 15 years. He attempted to interrupt, defend himself, and possibly even draw attention to my actions and my role in the disaster. I yelled in a harsh voice, "Don't you dare turn this around on me. Don't you dare try to make this my fault." His face was pallid and he appeared confined and besieged. I suppose the most repulsive, buried thought, the one I hardly acknowledged to myself, clawed its way out of my head when I saw him appear so weak and completely defeated. Years ago, late one night, before Liam was born, he had shared that tiny seed of doubt in a rare moment of vulnerability. He was scared and overwhelmed. Was he prepared? Is he capable of doing this? Would he make a suitable father? I took that brittle confession, turned it into a weapon, and polished it into a shiv. The children watched us with wide, scared eyes, frozen beside the counter, pizza forgotten. I stared directly at Perry. Perhaps I glanced in their direction as well, allowing them to be collateral damage. The words, oozing with the collected hatred of 15 years, just flew out. The ensuing stillness was worse than the yelling. "You want to know the truth? You want to talk about feelings? Your dad never really wanted you anyway. He was terrified. He told me so." It was profound and absolute and sucked out the room's life, noise, and air. Liam's eyes widened and gleamed with tears that he refused to shed. Chloe simply gazed, her face completely blank with amazement, her mouth a tiny, quiet, "Oh." Perry didn't recoil, didn't scream back, and didn't reply with the rage I nearly wanted and expected. He simply burst like a balloon, pierced abruptly and irreparably. All of the stress, tension, and well-planned communication strategies simply disappeared, to be replaced by this terrible, meaningless silence. When he glanced at me, his face didn't look angry or hurt like I remembered from our past arguments. Somewhere deep within him, it was something other, something colder, something final, like a door slamming. His expression softened as he turned to face the children, but it was tinged with a profound grief that was more painful than any anger could have been. He simply squatted, slowly drew Liam and Chloe close to him, and whispered something quiet and comforting that I couldn't hear about getting their jackets and possibly eating ice cream without saying a word to me. With smooth, methodical gestures, he guided them out of the kitchen as if he were holding delicate glass. He didn't turn around. With my heart thumping wildly against my ribs and the sound of my own hurtful words echoing in my ears, I stood by myself in the suddenly empty kitchen. "Oh, crap, Amy, what did you just do? You crossed a line, a big one," cried a little scared voice deep inside of me, but it was nearly immediately drowned out by the louder, more familiar voice, the one that usually jumps in to defend, to rationalize. He shoved me. He pushed me into a corner. He deserved it. For making everything so hard, for being so damn. It was irrevocably no longer our house. It felt like a stage set after the play was over, hollow and wrong. Later that night, long after the kids were supposed to be asleep in their rooms, but I doubted anyone was, I heard him making quiet, serious-toned calls in the spare room. The door was closed, and I could see the faint blue glow of his laptop, screen reflecting off the darkened window, apartment listings, rental agreements. There was no dramatic packing scene like in the movies, no final tearful confrontation, no putting clothes in a duffel bag, just this methodical, quiet, chillingly efficient dismantling of the life we had laboriously, if imperfectly, built together. In the days that followed, I made a few attempts to mend the rift by offering a half-hearted, mumbled, "Look, Perry, things got really heated the other night," or the traditional non-apology, "I'm sorry he took it that way. I was just upset." However, the words felt like pebbles thrown against a thick, soundproof wall. He simply nodded, his eyes unreadable and distant, and immediately shifted the topic to logistics, picking up the kids from school, allocating furniture equitably, and hiring movers. It seemed as though he had already left weeks ago. His body had simply not caught up. I felt this terrifying loss of control, this rising tide of panic, this terrifying loss of control. He wasn't retaliatory. He wasn't engaging. He wasn't giving me anything to push against. He wasn't fighting back. He wasn't engaging. He wasn't giving me anything to push against. I tried suggesting a family fun day the next weekend, a desperate attempt at normalcy, but he politely declined, citing prior commitments with the kids. The control was slipping through my fingers like sand, and that's how it happened. Perry moved out 3 weeks later into a small but clean-furnished apartment across town, closer to the kids' school. He got a lawyer, a brisk woman whose emails were polite but firm. Everything became formal and structured, communicated through emails and official documents that were polite, concise, and utterly impersonal, focusing only on the children's schedules and well-being, custody arrangements, visitation schedules, and child support calculations based on state guidelines. It was clinical, efficient, and soul-crushing. He got the kids most of the time. Primary physical custody, the lawyer called it. Apparently, telling your children their father never wanted them, using his past vulnerability as a weapon in front of them, isn't exactly a point in your favor during mediation sessions where a calm, neutral third party listens to both sides. I was the divorced mother whose life fell apart spectacularly, the cautionary tale whispered about at school pickup. I tried venting to my friend Karen one night, explaining how Perry's sensitivity and constant need for processing drove me crazy, how he provoked me. She just listened, nodding slowly, but her eyes held a reservation I hadn't seen before. "Wow, Amy," she finally said, her voice carefully neutral. "That sounds really intense." Of course, he twisted it all to the lawyers and the mediator, playing the victim flawlessly. "Thank you, Karen. Very beneficial. It is exhausting and pointless to try to describe it now. People don't understand because they weren't there for the years of eye-rolling rejections, the ongoing stress of his personal development, or the way he turned everything into a significant psychiatric problem that needed in-depth examination. In that one terrible moment, they only hear what I said. It's incredibly unjust. He gets to portray the injured hero, the loving single father valiantly picking up the pieces and winning hearts and minds. And me? The house is eerily quiet on weekends. The neighbors give me pitying but sympathetic looks, and I'm left in this large empty house dealing with the aftermath and awkward silent handovers in neutral spots. Seeing the children is difficult, painful, really. They are carefully courteous, but they are also aloof and protective, as if they are always bracing themselves for me to blow up again. Liam now hardly ever looks me in the eye and responds with a single word. At drop-off, Chloe gives me these compulsory, brief, tight hugs, her little body rigid in my arms. During their comfortable evenings in his new apartment, Perry undoubtedly poisoned them by feeding them his skewed version of events. I wish I had a different outcome. Of course, yes, I detest this. I detest the murmurs. I detest the silent echoes of empty places. I detest the pathetic glances. I detest the fact that he somehow emerged from this as the stable dad and the good guy. It's incredibly lonely, inconvenient, and most definitely not the life I had in mind for myself. But do I regret the actual words I used? He pushed me too far, to be honest. He refused to pay attention. He wouldn't be ordinary. He kept attempting to fix me and psychoanalyze me. Perhaps I became angry. I'm human, all right. However, he must accept some of the blame for helping to get me there. With his dramatic sighs, his incessant desire for approval, and all of his therapy talk, he was definitely not easy to live with. It would never have reached that stage if he hadn't been so obstinately sensitive and determined to turn every minor argument into a thing. You do realize that it takes two to tango? A marriage can only be broken by two people. He couldn't stand even a single minute of searing honesty, so he just broke the whole damn thing. And now that I'm trapped in the ruins, my life is the one suffering. There are days when I want to yell at how unjust everything is. It's simply so unjust.